The Wilshire United Methodist Church was not always where it is now. It became possible for a community of believers in 1901 to understand that they needed a place where they could all congregate and start being part of the community as well as worshiping. So they started in a schoolhouse on 2nd Street and Hobart Boulevard, and then built out into worshiping in 1913 into this specific area. The church merged with several other churches during that time and became a very large congregation. And they purchased this building in 1931 and became a large congregation of about 2,241 members. The church struggled financially during the Depression, but they were able to pay off the mortgage in 1945. So 1931 is the birth year of the church being in this building. And so for 93 years, worship has occurred here under various merging of ministries. The church became a multicultural church in terms of having a Korean ministry, an English ministry, a Hispanic ministry, and of course a Filipino ministry. All of these occurred over a 10 to 15 year span. As a church, sometimes we encounter some difficulties, and the district and the conference of United Methodists determined that the church needed to be one church, and one church with two languages. This has been a change and a struggle for us to become a more perfect union, and so we continue in this mold. Church always has continued in spite of where fractures have occurred. And especially in this year, after the large conference of bishops, which occurs every 4 years, it was determined that churches could split off of the main United Methodist Church if they could financially be able to function outside of it. But Wilshire has maintained a traditional way of operating because they've always admitted anyone who wanted to be part of the community in spite of the ways we segregate people. We wanted to unify the community and accept people wherever they were in their lives. The structure itself is part Italian Gothic, and it has many, many attributes of European culture and British culture. It has been a source of pride for us because many people who were in the movie industries were married here, along with many just regular couples. And we've also maintained community events such as the Los Angeles Philharmonic came here and gave concerts, neighborhood concerts. The Legal Voices and the Lawyers Philharmonic also were here practicing and gave concerts where we received some of the proceeds from time to time. The church has been opened up to the community in many ways. Organizations such as Debtors Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, and even children's resources organizations were housed here. We had a preschool that was for the neighborhood, and we also had a gym, and we still have that gym, but the gym was used mostly by people in the community. In 1973, the church was designated a cultural historical monument. And we also are allowed to maintain the structure for generations and generations. One event that affected the church very, very badly. It was a fire that occurred, and the fire started in the fellowship hall and came into the main sanctuary, and several of the beams were destroyed and damaged, and the pipe organ was also damaged. The church was unable to function in its full capacity for about a year and a half, and we worshiped over at the Masonic temple across the way.
What caused the fire?
Well, the first thought was that, there was a family that we allowed to stay in the, where the kitchen is downstairs there. They kind of cordoned up, because we weren't using the kitchen in the way we were using it now, that we use it now. And the family was allowed to stay between the fellowship hall and the kitchen so they could use things. So they think it started, some people say it was just purely an electrical fire, and we wanted to blame somebody, but, it was just, a fire. And then, with, smoke seeped in and, just sort of damaged, the upper part of this. The fire itself didn't burn, it just damaged the entire, the beams were damaged. They had to replace the beams, and then the beams were like scorched, I think they had to replace some of the beams. I think the ones, because the fellowship hall, this side of it, I think coming up here, that's where the pipe organ is over there. So, that, I think a little bit of the fire kind of did some damage there. So those that beam, and that beam were pretty much, damaged. There's a construction company that actually came out of Phoenix, I think it was, Arizona, because one of the people that was still alive that was working to help build this building was still alive. And when they got all the drawings back from the city, they actually were able to figure out, what needs to be done to make things match up, and to not have, and to pretty much get back, to be able to put the names of the people back up there. Because for a long time I came to this church, I had no idea that, I never looked up that high. And then one day I looked up and I said, what the heck is this? They have Byron, they have Shakespeare. I don't think there were any women up there, but, so it comes with such a classic look. And thankfully there was one guy who was alive and could tell us how to do it, and came,
For the ceiling on the fellowship hall?
No, for this ceiling here, I think I made it kind of run like it was just a fellowship hall, but it's the main sanctuary that had the ceiling damage because the fire came from over there and just seeped through where the pipe organ is and went all the way up here. The stained glass windows needed to be cleaned, and some of them had to be repaired. And so it was a painstaking thing, but thankfully most of it was covered by insurance. And so we were able to do it because it was just like finding people who knew how to repair the stained glass, who knew how to put the ceiling, a tapestry, I think it's ceiling tapestry, up, and replace the names, because the names of the people on the side of the persons on the side wall there are all from part European history and Moorish history, and a lot of his, I think Shakespeare is there, and a lot of other notable 17th and 18th century names. So it basically continues to look the way it looked in the 1920s. So not much was changed because we were able to restore everything. It's become like community-wise things that the community needed, because we had a youth group that used to meet on Saturdays for movie night. And for, they generally were here. They would do some, religious things, but they were basically young people getting together. And at the time, it was a merger of the Korean kids, the Filipino kids, the black kids, or whatever it is. And when the pastors didn't like that, the fact that they were not doing purely religious things, and so they said they didn't want them to, it just called Friday Night's Live. That's what it used to be called. And we had a younger minister, and he was into it and whatever. And then the preschool, because the preschool, we felt like it's for the community. We didn't care what religion people's kids were or whatever. At least kids don't know that much about religion. What their parents tell them is what it is. And then, one of the senior pastors said, we need to teach religion in it. And of course, that was a source. The people who helped us start it were just appalled that here it is, we have, 43 kids and a waiting list and everything else. And we're, giving them instruction. They're, teachers were qualified to teach and whatever, but who was going to teach religion, to these kids who some of them are Muslims, some of them, Buddhists, whatever. And we just, so many little fractures just because you feel like it should be this certain way. The thing about Methodists is that we have a book called the Book of Discipline. And there are parts of the Methodist churches that don't like the Book of Discipline. They believe they should teach straight from the Bible, regardless of how they interpret it. And then the Book of Discipline is on the side. But it's a structure. That's what we call Methodists. We always had some kind of structure that said, this is what we believe in, So you get people coming into the religion who don't think that the Book of Discipline is current, But every 4 years they go in and they change things. Like this new designation which says that we will not exclude, gay pastors or gay people. That's a big deal, and that's caused, so many, like Eurasian churches, they fall away and call themselves some other kind of Methodist. People in the Caribbean, I mean, I'm part of my family is from parts of the Caribbean, and no, that's not going to happen, go to that church. So it's kind of like, okay, I think it is in the part of the Bible that I feel is effective and current is that all people are welcome, And if you're going to have this kind of attitude about all welcome, then you're going to have preachers that can preach to people like that. And so, and to all of us, and tell us that, this is the way, this is a brother, this is a sister. You can come from wherever you come from. This is it. Because when the Korean congregation came here, there was this big thing because the church was mostly white. And, the board of trustees and the pastor at the time said, look, we can't charge money for people to worship in this, church. It's a church for all, and there are brothers and sisters. And so, they came, they didn't have to pay anything or whatever. And people here were horrified. I remember the Nichols, they were really great big contributors. They were Hancock Park people, and they gave a lot of money to this church. And they stood up there, they asked to speak to the congregation and told us they would never come back to this church as long as the Koreans are here. So a lot of people left. It's what you balance. You balance, because not all people are in opposition. Not all people think that, another race is bad or whatever. Because we all have something that motivated us to come here, and let's just exchange stories. And then you find out they're pretty similar. You have racism, you have, sexual bias, you have all of these things. But if we can come together and have a discussion, you look at people as real people, not like them, and this person doesn't belong, well, that's out there in the world. In the church, let's see what we can do together. I think Pastor Susanna brought a different kind of motivation for people to remain committed, you know. And I think that's what I'm going to miss her for, you know, because, you know, she struggled because as a female in a church that's dominated by males, you know, generally dominated by males. She's here, she's worked really hard, I mean, through the pandemic and everything else, you know. And it's always difficult, you know, but life is difficult, you know. You know, sometimes I said, you know, we're kept alive by the difficulties because we always want to overcome. And the church is supposed to help some of our brokenness. I hope the fair works out well, you know, to introduce people to the community because, you know, the United Methodist Women, we try. You know, we do all our little things, social action stuff. But you've got to do something, you know. It's not okay to say, to throw your hands up in the air and say, the hell with it. You know, I don't think as human beings, you know, that's our survival. The people who withstood all the challenges and say, you know, one day it'll be better. You know, slavery is one day it'll be better. You know, war, one day it'll be better. You know, people, I think it's in our DNA, you know, to continue and struggle and overcome, you know, even when you don't overcome, you know you've made that, you know, that leap to try, you know. But I've had a hard kind of teenage years and going into my 20s. It was a very, very difficult time for me. And I came to this church because there are a lot of us. My family is large, my siblings are plenty, and my parents had no means of paying for me to go to college. But I said, you know, I got accepted, I'm going to college, you know. So I was out here almost on my own. And I came to this church because I ran out of money and I didn't know how I was going to live. And Pastor Phillips was here, and there was a white woman who was the secretary, and I walked in and I says, I need to see the pastor. And she says, you know, I think he's in his office. I'll let him know that you're here. And he came out to meet me. And I had this little thing that when you get not baptized, when you get at a certain age, at 11 or something, you get accepted into the church. And I had this little paper that said I was, you know, I'm a Methodist. And I was fighting to find this paper. And he came, you know, he said, come on, let's go into my office. He says, I said, I'm looking for and he says, you don't need to look for that. You're like a daughter to me. And I just started crying and I told him, I said, I'm almost completely out of money. I'm not going to be able to go to school or pay my rent or whatever it is. And he said, I can fix that. I will help you. And he made a phone call to Tennessee, to the main office there, and asked them what forms do I need to fill out. And I fill out the forms, and he says, go back to your school and have the chaplain sign it. And they sent me $500. At the time I'm going to college, $500 to go to the University of California was a lot of money, you know. And it sort of jump-started me because I said, you know, I didn't have to prove who I was. I know that, I said, it's a Methodist church, and I was a Methodist, and I'm passing it, you know, going to school. So I felt like there are people in this church that could use some understanding of what's available through the church and a difference you can make by being part of the church. At one time, we used to have all these little food things, you know, for the stores. We could give them a voucher to Ralph's or whatever it is for them to go get some food. At one time, we paid for a family who was, you know, in the streets for a hotel for a month for a motel, you know. But, you know, we don't do some of these things anymore. And people see people on the street and what's the church doing and whatever. But, and sometimes you don't like to just ring your own bell and tell people all the stuff you're doing or whatever. But if you come into the church, you can see that, you know, people are trying, you know. It's always been a struggle to get people to actually believe that they can change things through a religious organization, you know. And because religious organizations have rules, you know, you know, you don't do this, you carry yourself a certain way, you dress a certain way. Because I know people who, one day one of the ushers came to church before we used to wear pants. She came to church in a pantsuit, and there was an uproar. Why she shouldn't be an usher anymore. I mean, dude, are you people crazy? Now look at how many people, because, the Methodist Church originated in England, so a lot of English things, even the name Plymouth on the outside, which is supposedly a lot of the structure itself was Gothic, Italian Gothic, but it had there was a place in England called Plymouth something, so the rock that's outside is Plymouth Rock. And so a lot of representations are English and, Italian Gothic, whatever the structure is. I know that much about the structure. And a lot of stained glass windows were things that people gave to the church. Some names are on them, when they were donated. It was a wealthy church because the entire Hancock community, which was part Jewish, part Christian, worshiped here. And a Jewish woman came. I don't know how she happened to come to the church, but she came to the church. And by the way she was greeted, she donated, I think it's $700,000 to the church from one visit, So that became the foundation that still exists today, because we're not supposed to touch the corpus, just whatever interest comes in we can use for certain things. But Wilshire has always been a traditional congregation that accepted everybody, And, we had gay people, we had, people who were transsexual, we had, all kinds of people, because we maintained an open heart, open minds, open doors. And that didn't always sit well with people, because you have people who are very traditional who say, well, they don't belong here. The Bible says this, the Bible says that. But generally, we just maintained. They're all comers. We don't care, like our communion is open to, Buddhists, everybody who comes, and, they don't have to say they believe all the things we believe. So it's a process. It's a hard process. But, change is hard. And as you get older, sometimes you get so fixed in maintaining that, that belief, that it becomes some of the older people left, some people who didn't want to be involved with Korean people, they took off, so anyway, that's the history of that. African American Methodist Episcopal Church, which was started because Black people could go to the churches, the Methodist churches, but they could not ascend to any committees or hierarchical positions. So they started their own church. But they're still using the Methodist way of doing things. So you can go to one of them and you can see what's been maintained. Oh, it's almost like the Catholic Church. The Methodist Church was the last of the churches, the Protestant churches, to leave the Catholic Church. And when they left, they still maintained some little, Catholic traditions, so that they're trying to just, move away from after all these years, But it's a very interesting religious organization, because I think it's one of the ones that has women in really, non-traditional roles, of all the Protestant churches, because the Baptists, they don't allow women to do certain things. You can't give communion, you can't do whatever. But the Methodist Church has always been open. And the social history of the Methodist Church is what attracts people to it, because they believe in a lot of, social principles of how to treat people. So anyway, we had pastors who were against the proliferation of nuclear weapons, about poverty, about social structures that discriminate, because slavery was a big, part of church organizations supported it. And the Methodists broke away from that. And I mean, people left the church just like they're leaving now because, they said, slavery was abhorrent and we don't want to be a part of it anymore. So it's a very strong social principled church because we believe that all human beings, deserve to be in a place where they're accepted for who they are and to feel that they're part of the human family.